on the panel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wallace. It's really lovely to be invited.
Firstly, tell us about that change. What line of work were you in?
Well, I was a travel agent for 11 years. And unfortunately, as we all know, that industry was hit pretty hard with all the crazy COVID stuff that's been going on this year. So, yeah, unfortunately, that's happened.
And your interest in cakes, how did that start? Did that coincide, or did that precede your work?
Yeah. Yeah, sort of. I mean, it's really always been baking and pottering in the kitchen has always just been a hobby of mine. And then a friend of mine suggested that I create an Instagram page for fun, just to, showcase the work that I'm doing for friends and family. And it almost accidentally happened, quite organically, where I put the photos of what I've done up, and people, friends, family started messaging me and asking, "Oh, could you do my birthday cake? Could you do some cupcakes for my daughter or something?" And then randomly last week, I decided to post my work that I've been doing since the redundancy on the Choice website, and which is on the Facebook page, and it just sort of blew up. And
wow.
I didn't anticipate the reaction that I had at all. I mean, I'm absolutely humbled and completely blown away, but it was pretty overwhelming, to be honest.
Yeah. Isn't it wonderful, Pam, when, like Nicole here, you decide to take that plunge into the unknown, and it works.
Well, I'm also congratulating Nicole in my head on it takes courage.
Yes.
And it takes a self-belief and great. I mean, I am hoping in many ways, not all cakes, obviously, but the COVID-19, there will be good new creative stuff comes out of it, and better treatment of each other along with it.
Stephen, question for Nicole?
Oh, not a question. Nicole, are you involved with the SPCA Cupcake Donation Program? I've never heard of it, but this morning, here's a shout out to Angela, who came to work with the ones she'd cooked, and they were fantastic and dairy-free, and we were ready to mock the dairy-free, and they were just great. Is that something that you know about?
I do know about the SPCA Cupcake Day. I was looking at actually participating in it, but the amount of orders that I actually received last week from the post on the Choice Facebook page made it
great.
So it was actually impossible for me to spare time.
You go, girl.
I'm a massive supporter of like animal rights and all that sort of stuff. I love it. So it's just been crazy, and the support from the community, the New Zealand community, the Christchurch community has been unbelievable. I think we are really lucky down here to have such an amazing country of people who really back each other. It's pretty special.
All right, so you're transplanted from New York, now in New Zealand. Well done. That is Nicole Marie's Kitchen. Thank you, Nicole. And boy, oh boy, Pam Corkery, Stephen Franks, thank you very much for being with me this afternoon, both of you.
Thank you.
I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow, 3:45. Till then, see ya.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, the Prime Minister carves up the cabinet cake, so who got the cream and who got the crumbs and why? The new Deputy Prime Minister joins us, and we talk to the only political freshman to make it into the inner circle. New audio released to Australia's 60 Minutes programme reveals a Whakaari White Island tour guide feared an eruption in the minutes before the explosion and cut a tour short. The trust behind a Christchurch Mosque claims it's getting a raw deal over accusations of financial wrongdoing. The Poets, the Spies, the Vodka and the Magpies will have all of them, plus a page-turner about booming real-world book sales and the Hawke's Bay water that's turning hairdos to poos.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata with DNA. The ministerial winners and the losers have been revealed in Jacinda Ardern's new lineup. Grant Robertson will become Deputy Prime Minister and continue to lead the COVID economic response. Nanaia Mahuta picks up foreign affairs and Aisha Verrill shoots straight into Cabinet. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
This was Jacinda Ardern's opportunity to start afresh with a number of cabinet places she needed to fill and in the midst of a global pandemic.
I'm excited by this team.
Grant Robertson takes Deputy Prime Minister after Kelvin Davis turned it down.
This will put another set of challenges on the table, but I'm looking forward to it.
Andrew Little's preparing for his new job as Health Minister.
The next couple of weeks is going to be reading.
With new Cabinet Associate Infectious Disease Specialist Aisha Verrill.
There's always room for improvement, and I'll bring a critical eye to the briefings I get in the next few weeks.
In a surprise move, Nanaia Mahuta picks up Foreign Affairs. Chris Hipkins becomes Minister responsible for the COVID-19 response. Jenny Salisa has lost her position as a minister altogether, while Phil Twyford's been demoted out of Cabinet but stays on as a minister. This is Jane Patterson.
One of the survivors of the Whakaari White Island eruption has described being thrown around by the force of the blast and being burned in darkness by the gas. 23-year-old Stephanie Browett suffered third-degree burns to 70% of her body and spent months in hospital and still wears a full face covering. Her father Paul and her sister Crystal both died. In an interview with 60 Minutes Australia, she describes gas and projectiles surrounding her.
I thought I was going to die. It was just rolling me over. The force was just that strong that my whole body was being shoved and pushed and rolled onto the ground. I was just hitting things while getting burnt at the same time. It was the most terrifying moment of my life.
Eruption survivor Stephanie Browett. The trust behind Christchurch Mosque says it's been treated unfairly over claims of financial impropriety. An anonymous complaint in the local paper accuses the Linwood Islamic Charitable Trust of a lack of transparency around its financial accounts. One of the claims is that the trust's treasurer, Abdul Aziz, was somehow involved in arranging to pay himself a $5,000 gift as a thank you for saving his fellow worshippers on March 15. The trust's chair, Ahmed Shahinga, says Mr Aziz had nothing to do with the gift and the only reason their annual return to charity services is late is because of COVID. And there's more on this story coming up soon on Checkpoint. The group representing people still battling with earthquake claims have concerns with the new model, which will affect natural disaster claimants from early next year. Promising to be quicker and less stressful for claimants, the new model will enable people to bypass EQC and only use their main private insurers. The claimants reference group chair, Ali Jones, says unless assessments of damage are thorough, consistent and accurate, partnering with the private insurer is not going to address the significant issues claimants face years on.
We don't have a foundation to move forward positively for claimants. So it's a little disappointing, I think, that hasn't featured more prominently in this new model.
Ali Jones of the Claimants Reference Group. A rest home has been found in breach of the Health and Disability Code after the elderly woman's family installed a hidden camera. The woman, a full-time resident who requires hospital-level care with a complex medical history, including dementia, was bedbound and relied solely on the staff for care. The Health and Disability Deputy Commissioner Rose Wall says the woman had a number of falls and her granddaughter installed a hidden camera. She says the footage provided showed the woman being treated roughly, was barely spoken to by staff and appearing distressed. Rose Wall says it showed a troubling and disappointing picture of care that falls well below the expected standard. The trust which runs the rest home has been referred to the Director of Proceedings. It's 4 minutes past 5. With the Bledisloe Cup secured for an 18th straight season, the All Blacks are now turning their attentions to the Tri-Nations. This Saturday's test against the Wallabies in Brisbane doubles as the dead rubber fourth match for the Trans-Tasman Trophy and the second game of the new three-team tournament. All Blacks hooker Cody Taylor says they've changed their focus to the Tri-Nations.
Made pretty clear it's time to move forward this morning in our review, that there's a whole new challenge ahead with that, and we want to win that. So this week we've got to play Australia again, but it's almost like Aussie won again because it's a new trophy.
All Black soccer Cody Taylor. The England netball team fly home tomorrow not knowing what the immediate future looks like with their country about to go into lockdown. Acting head coach Kat Ratnapala says everything is up in the air.
We've got lots of different strategies of going forward, whether there are any other international opportunities this year or even in January. It's still unknown at the moment. So for us, it's very much making sure that we're taking control of the controllables and hopefully we can continue that elite return back to training.
Acting England coach Kat Ratnapala. And the 2016 champion Aaron Gate has taken over the lead in cycling's Tour of Southland. That's the news.
It's down to the wire in the US presidential race.
There's counties, there's states, and there's individual cities that have different voting rules and regulations, and there's some potentially irregularities.
While Americans in New Zealand look on.
It's like watching a horror show, watching what's going on there. Just the disregard that government officials have had for science.
And the virus looms over the final sprint to the polls.
Making stuff up doesn't make people's lives better. You've got to have a plan.
Ready or not, it's Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Cloudy periods, isolated showers, possibly heavy and thundery north of Auckland. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloud gradually increasing, isolated showers developing tonight. Taranaki to Wellington, also Waiata Upper, occasional rain, clearing tomorrow afternoon to fine spells and isolated showers. For Bulla, Westland, Nelson and Marlborough, periods of rain, possibly heavy tomorrow, rain clearing Marlborough tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury and North Otago mostly cloudy, a few showers retreating inland, a period of rain for Canterbury tomorrow morning. For the remainder of Otago, also Southland and Fiordland, isolated showers clearing, then fine weather with high cloud. And Chatham Islands mainly fine, a chance of a shower tonight. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Jacinda Ardern is not messing around, making a major shake-up to her ministerial team in the first move of her second term. She's rolled out a new Deputy Prime Minister, new Health Minister, a new COVID-19 gig and a Foreign Affairs bolt from the blue. Then there are a host of new faces, some shooting straight into Cabinet. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
This is no minor refresh. This is an earthquake, a seismic shake-up to match the election result.
We have extraordinary talent in this caucus, and I believe that alongside the experience, we've got the right mix.
A new look lineup right from the top. Jacinda Ardern naming Grant Robertson as her right-hand man, appearing well known to the public. The Finance Minister is now Deputy Prime Minister too.
It's a true honour. The relationship that I have with the Prime Minister is well known. We've known each other personally for a long time.
For Grant Robertson to get the job, Kelvin Davis, Labour's deputy, had to step aside, saying he did not want to be the Deputy PM. He says he wants to focus on improving outcomes for Maori. He takes on Minister for Children with responsibility for Oranga Tamariki.
Jacinda and Grant are the dream team. They will work fantastically together and they've got my 100% support.
It wasn't just the Deputy PM slot left vacant by Winston Peters. It's Foreign Affairs too, and not one pundit picked his successor. Nanaia Mahuta, the first woman ever appointed to the position.
I follow in the line of a long legacy of firsts for women.
She is someone who builds fantastic relationships very, very quickly, and that is one of the key jobs in a foreign affairs role.
There's a whole new health team too, and a laser focus on COVID-19. Chris Hipkins takes on a new role with total responsibility for the pandemic response. Andrew Little gets the rest of health.
The next couple of weeks is going to be reading.
And what's this? Aisha Verrill, a first-term MP, parachuted right into Cabinet. The experienced epidemiologist takes on Associate Health.
My view is if you're a country in the middle of a global pandemic and you have a doctor in infectious diseases, it would be wrong not to use that talent.
Dr Verrill's one of 6 first-time ministers. And then there are the comeback kids. David Clark is back in Cabinet. He gets Minister of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, a new job after his COVID-19 mountain bike misadventures. And Meka Whaitiri, stripped of her job last term, leaving under a cloud, she's back as Minister of Customs.
Oh, look, I'm absolutely honoured to get a recall back and to be part of this amazing
team. There should be a place for second chances when people make an enormous effort, as Mika has.
But not everyone gets a second chance. Jeannie Salesa has lost all her ministerial warrants, punishment for underperformance and a high staff turnover. Phil Twyford, meanwhile, has been dropped from Cabinet. The architect of the Kiwi Build and light rail fiascos, effectively disarmed, named the new Minister for Disarmament.
He himself will acknowledge that in some of the portfolios he's held, we haven't been able to make the progress that he would have wanted. However, at the same time, I would not keep him as a minister unless I believed he had something to offer, and he does. So I'd have to say that he has been quite remarkable about it.
Jacinda Ardern trod a conservative and cautious path during the election campaign, but her first mark in her second term is anything but. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
As you heard there, Grant Robertson's got the job of Deputy Prime Minister after Kelvin Davis turned it down. I spoke to Grant Robertson earlier and asked if congratulations was in order or if it's a case of be careful what you wish for.
I'm very humbled and honoured to have the role. I've enjoyed working with the Prime Minister over the last 3 years as Finance Minister, and to take on the Deputy's role just gives me another opportunity to support her in doing her job.
When did you start talking about it with the Prime Minister?
After the election, she had asked Kelvin Davis, as she said today, to consider the role, and after the election he came back and has said to her that he did not want to take it up, and so she raised the possibility with me once the head said that.
So what about the job is off-putting then, if he didn't want it?
Oh, I just think Kelvin himself today has said he wants to focus on some of the things that have drawn him to Parliament. He came here, as he said, as the MP for Taitokerau. He's got a passion for the work he's now going to be undertaking in the children's space, but also continuing the work in corrections, and he wants to play to his strengths, and he took the decision that being Deputy Prime Minister was not a role that he wanted. You've got to want to do a job like Deputy Prime Minister, and so I think given that, it was clear for Jacinda that she needed to find somebody else to fill the role.
Do you really, really want to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, I've really enjoyed what I've done as Finance Minister. Being Deputy Prime Minister adds on to that. It's basically a support role for the Prime Minister. She can't be in two places at once, and so there's plenty of occasions where someone needs to fill in, and I'm very, very happy to do that.
So you're kind of like the understudy, but do you have a mentor who tells you what your role is as Deputy Prime Minister?
That's a good question in politics generally, isn't it? Look, I've been around Parliament for a long time. I've seen various people undertake the role, so I've got a good guide as to how those people have done it. Clearly, Sir Michael Cullen is someone I've looked to from the finance portfolio. He also fulfilled the role of Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister as well, so I'll continue to draw on his advice along with others.
Let's take a sort of step back and take a look at the whole list that was announced today. So, Phil Twyford, why was he demoted?
Well, obviously those are the decisions that the Prime Minister makes, and you'll primarily need to put questions like that to her. But as she said today, we didn't make the progress we wanted to, particularly in the housing area, and that she's decided that she wants now to move forward with Phil playing a different role. Equally, as she said today, he's still a Minister outside Cabinet because he does have a lot to offer us in his role. He's an experienced MP, and so we look forward to working with him there. But we didn't make the progress we wanted to in a couple of the areas that he was responsible for, and the Prime Minister's indicated that was the reasoning behind her decision.
A couple of things there. When you say we need to put those questions to the Prime Minister, are all of these decisions regarding the Cabinet list today entirely a captain's call, entirely the Prime Minister's decisions, with no input from anyone else?
Well, the situation for all Prime Ministers is that the allocation of portfolios is up to them. Of course, the Prime Minister talks to her colleagues, consults,
absolutely,
talks to people,
but did she
people
talk
in the
to
community.
You? Did she talk to you about the broader picture?
Well, look, we had a number of conversations about the lineup and what she was looking for, and the enormous talent that we've got in this team. But I'm just one person giving that input to her. Ultimately, these decisions, as they are for any Prime Minister, fall to them.
So, Nanaia Mahuta, did she ask for the Foreign Affairs job?
Again, you would need to talk. I don't know the answer to that question. What I do know is I think she'll make a terrific Minister of Foreign Affairs. She's somebody who I've worked closely with over a long period of time, but particularly in the last 3 years, and her ability to develop strong relationships, her very strong sense of being from New Zealand, I think is going to serve her very well in that role. And I think it's about time we had a female Minister of Foreign Affairs. We haven't had one before, and Nanaya's going to do a terrific job of that.
So the Prime Minister said today at the stand-up that no one other than Kelvin Davis declined a job that they were offered. But what I'm really curious about is who had to be persuaded.
Well, again, I know, I'm sorry to sound like a broken record here.
You're the Deputy Prime Minister, and you're here as the all-of-government spokesperson today. So come on, you're in the inner circle. Who had to be persuaded?
Look, there's always, I think the Prime Minister used the word today, that it's an iterative process, that these conversations start. She often would come back to a person perhaps once, twice, or even 3 times to talk about different roles. It's about matching skills to roles, looking at teams. You know, for example, you've seen our very strong health team that's come out today. It's about matching different people within that so that we cover the full ground. So there's a lot of coming and going, but I think everybody in our team understands that it's a massive honour and privilege to serve as a minister and within the executive. And so people are unlikely to turn many things down or need to be cajoled. We all want to be part of the team that's delivering good outcomes for New Zealanders.
You're still Sports Minister, so you understand that when a team's drawn up, there are always people who are disappointed. So who's disappointed on your team?
Look, you know, this is a team of incredibly talented people, so you're absolutely right. There will be people who'll be disappointed, who perhaps were looking for a particular role or a role in the executive who didn't get it.
Oh, who are they?
I was going to say, I think we owe respect to our whole team to recognise that there are only so many positions, and so not everybody can get them. What I've witnessed since the election is the most unified and committed group of people in our caucus. All of them have jobs to do, whether they're in the executive or outside.
So do you think there's anyone in particular who was shortchanged?
No.
You would say that though, wouldn't you?
Well, I'm the Deputy Prime Minister, as you said, Lisa.
OK, your list of priorities, again, the Prime Minister has said top 2 priorities for this government are the health response to COVID and driving the economic recovery. Now, that economic recovery, you have got those heavy lifting portfolios. Do you feel any pressure there?
Oh, look, no more so than ever as being the Minister. I mean, I recognise that COVID-19's health and economic impact are still to be fully felt. My bit of the equation is particularly around the economic impact, and we are going to have to work very hard as a country over the next few years to recover and rebuild and get that build back better approach going. So we're going to have to be careful. We're going to have to be balanced in the program as we put forward at the election. But no, I've got a lot of optimism about New Zealand. I see the New Zealand economy doing better than people expected. Plenty of headwinds to come, but I've got huge optimism about our country and our resilience.
What is the top of your to-do list?
Oh, there's many things at the top. The infrastructure
the number one
role.
Thing.
Well, I was about to say the infrastructure role and taking that on is really important to me. We are spending a lot of money over the next few years in the infrastructure space, and not only in transport but also in areas like health and education. I want to make sure we get on and we deliver to New Zealanders the quality infrastructure they need and deserve.
You know what's said about absolute power, so I want to know, how are you going to avoid second-term arrogance or entitlement with such a large majority and no coalition partners as such?
Look, the Prime Minister's been extremely clear with all of her colleagues that our job is a privilege and a right that has to be earned and re-earned every day. And I don't think there's anyone in our team who takes that for granted. No one is complacent about the job that's in front of us. We are humbled by the result we got in the election, and we have to continue to earn New Zealanders' support every single day.
But I suppose it's early days, so it's easy to have that enthusiasm and keep yourself in check. As time goes on, not so much, potentially, and we've seen it in other governments.
Yeah, and look, I think the lesson we have to draw from other governments is it's vitally important that we remember what a privilege and an honour this is. And it is actually, I think, one of the character traits of our Prime Minister that she is a person who is very humble and very aware of the privilege that we've got, and she transfers that on to the rest of her team. So I'm certainly not going to be forgetting that anytime soon.
And that was Grant Robertson, the new Deputy Prime Minister. It is 19 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your reckons on that, the new cabinet lineup. Some significant changes. Andrew Little taking on health. Chris Hipkins is the new COVID response minister. And you heard then Nanaia Mahuta is taking on foreign affairs. Let us know what you think. Are they inspired choices or not? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A Whakaari White Island crater walk was cut short in the minutes leading up to last December's fatal explosion, as a guide noticed the situation was getting dangerous. In audio released to Australia's 60 Minutes programme, an unnamed tour guide tells his group the island is at level 2, but nearing level 3. Survivor Stephanie Browett, who suffered burns to 70% of her body and has had 20 operations and 8 fingers amputated since, told the programme her tour was then cut short. She and other victims say they were left for dead in the moments after the explosion as rescue helicopters were turned around and more lives could have been saved. Jordan Bond reports.
On December 9 last year, 23-year-old Australian uni graduate Stephanie Browett stepped onto Whakaari with her dad Paul and her sister Crystal. The group, on a day excursion from Royal Caribbean's Ovation of the Seas cruise ship, say they were not forewarned of any threat of eruption on the island that day. Footage and audio released exclusively to Australia's 60 Minutes programme from Crystal Browett's cell phone reveal for the first time the voice of the family's unnamed tour guide pointing out the danger not long before the eruption.
The higher the level, the more risk there was of an eruption. Level 3 is an eruption.
Oh, really?
So we're on level 2, nearing level 3 now.
The last photo of the family shows the three posing, all smiles, in front of the island's crater. But Stephanie told 60 Minutes Australia just minutes after that picture, black smoke started to emerge.
The first thing we did was take a photo, not realising that's an eruption and the danger. And then only a few seconds later, we heard the front tour guide scream, "Run."
Stephanie said the guide had earlier cut short a part of the tour because gas emissions on the island looked too unusual. Fellow Australian John Kozat also miraculously survived, but lost his son Chris in hospital while he was in a coma.
All of a sudden, these white-hot crystals started hitting me in the forehead. They just got worse and worse. I can remember saying to myself the Lord's Prayer because I just thought I was gone.
Surviving with his wife Lauren, Matt Urey said the blast quickly covered everything in sight.
The visibility went to zero. I could not see my hand in front of my face, and it was just hot. Everything was burning. You could feel your skin burning.
Stephanie Browett suffered third-degree burns to 70% of her body and spent months in hospital, where she's undergone 20 operations and had 8 fingers amputated. She spoke to 60 Minutes wearing a full-face burns mask.
I thought I was going to die. It was just rolling me over. The force was just that strong that my whole body was being shoved and pushed and rolled onto the ground. I was just hitting things while getting burnt at the same time. It was the most terrifying moment of my life.
Matt and Lauren Urey managed to scramble aboard a boat, which took 90 minutes to get back to Whakatane.
That boat ride was agonizing. We're burned horribly. We're laying in the sun, being splashed with salt water and ice cold air while we're completely burned. So it was excruciatingly painful.
Almost immediately after they saw the eruption from the mainland, helicopter pilots Jason Hill and Tom Story got in the air and were among the first to arrive. They were expecting paramedics to be not far behind them, but they ended up being the ones who saved people, including Stephanie Browett. The rescue helicopters were on the way but were told to turn around. St John's Medical Director Tony Smith told the program the information they had at the time was that it was not safe to fly to the island and put their people on the ground, so they returned to Whakatane. They arrived on the island an hour later, but in hindsight, he said they held off too long.
We have reflected, knowing that we know now, we could have flown to the island earlier. But had we gone to the island sooner, I'm absolutely medically confident we were not going to save any more additional people.
But Stephanie Browett told 60 Minutes if the rescue effort was quicker, Others, including her father Paul and sister Crystal, might have survived.
It's very upsetting just because I know it definitely would have made a difference for a lot of the people that were there, that were waiting. Lives could have been saved that weren't that day.
21 people died as a result of the eruption, including 2 whose bodies have never been recovered. Another 26 were injured, most with long roads to recovery. A WorkSafe investigation into the incident is ongoing. The first anniversary of the eruption is next month. For Checkpoint, call Jordan Bond, TNA.
The trust behind a Christchurch mosque says it's been treated unfairly over claims of financial impropriety. Last week, an unnamed complainant went to the local paper accusing the Linwood Islamic Charitable Trust of a lack of transparency around its financial accounts. A complaint has also been laid with Charities Services over the trust's late filing of its financial accounts. Conan Young spoke to members of the trust who say they have nothing to hide and are hurt by the allegations.
One of the claims is that the Trust's treasurer, Abdulaziz, was somehow involved in arranging to pay himself a $5,000 gift as a thank you for saving his fellow worshippers on March 15. Mr Aziz, who was thanked by Justice Manda during the gunman's sentencing for his bravery, chased the shooter and threw one of his guns at his windscreen. Abdulaziz showed RNZ a video of the moment he was handed the money at a public function.
Actually, I wasn't aware of that. But the brothers and things, they gave me that Thanksgiving, and you saw the video yourself. The mayor was there, the all government delegate was there, the police commissioner, the doctors, the ambulance. We had a Thanksgiving day, and it's been given to me on that day, in front of everybody.
The dinner where the money was gifted was a thank you to first responders and all of those who had helped Christchurch's Muslim community. It happened a month after the shootings and was attended by the Mayor and Government Minister Megan Woods. Faisal Syed, who organised it and is seen in the video handing over the money to Abdulaziz, says none of the trustees are paid for the work they do for their mosque and their only motivation is to help their fellow Muslims.
The whole idea was to bring everybody together and share a story and say those magical words of thank yous to them. The whole story, I suppose, is quite misleading. It has got a lot of strength to divide the community. It is disappointing, it's disheartening that we were not approached, because we would have been quite transparent, as we have always been transparent in our approach.
The chair of the trust, Ahmed Jahangir, who continues to struggle with an injury from the shootings, says the past 18 months have been challenging, as well as having to replace their treasurer, who is one of 7 to lose their lives at the Linwood Mosque. They've had to deal with the challenges thrown up by COVID-19. He says this explains why they are 1 month late with filing their annual return to Charities Services.
Yes, we are late in submitting our annual returns, but we are in the process of submitting it. Our accountants at this stage are working on our annual returns, and in a due course of time it will be submitted to the charity services.
Ahmed Jahangir says Charities Services has not launched a full-scale investigation into the trust. Instead, he says they're conducting a much lower-level inquiry involving an exchange of emails rather than formal interviews with trust members. Mr Jahangir says the trust has nothing to hide.
I'm a bit surprised that someone from the community or someone hasn't approached us before for an answer and straight away went to the media and raised these questions, which is quite shocking, and it should have happened in a different way. They could have come and spoken to us, and we could have given them answer.
Charities Services says it's received information about the trust, which it's currently assessing, and it will be engaging with the trust. Kei o te tahi ahau, mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Conan Young tēnei.
Showers like running mud and dodgy water that changes hair colour. They're among the complaints of residents of 2 small Hawke's Bay communities who are fed up with brown and smelly water and say the problem is getting worse. For 2 years, people in Te Awananga and Homoana say they've been enduring brown water flowing from their taps. Now they're worried the council's promised fix isn't going to deliver. Catherine Hutton reports.
The residents of Te Awanga are used to dirty water, but on Saturday it was the worst they've ever seen. Here's local resident Tim Durant.
If you can imagine drawing a bath for your child and the water was dark brown water in the drinking taps, people are having to go down to the Foursquare and they just about have to keep restocking every couple of hours, I imagine, with boxes of water. And, we pay our rates, we pay for the water.
He wasn't alone. Fellow resident Bronwyn Trafford also noticed.
Woke up to turning on a shower and the water was like running mud. So I passed comment on our Facebook page and then everyone started commenting on the fact that they had it at the worst I'd ever seen it as well.
The Hastings District Council says it received and responded to 5 reports from residents at the weekend. In a statement, it said,
"The reasons for an apparent increase in the issue over the weekend are being investigated. Things that can contribute include small variations in chlorine levels, chlorine reacts with the manganese, and changes in water demand."
Bronwyn, who has lived at Te Awanga for decades, says the trouble started when Havelock North's drinking water supply was contaminated in 2016.
We had the most beautiful water out here. I've been here 25 years and we all were very, very proud of how amazing our water was. And then it's called council covering their butts and they upped all the chlorine since that contamination in Havelock, and we've had nothing but problems ever since.
Tim says as a result of what happened in Havelock North, councils are required to have a trace of chlorine in the water, but that causes problems when there are high levels of iron and manganese.
My understanding is that the manganese and the iron, there's a reaction with it and it eats it all up, so they have to keep putting more chlorine in, and I would have thought common sense would be, how about not putting chlorine in until they get the new bore, which is meant to have less iron and manganese, and then switch it on. It just doesn't make sense.
Residents complain their water smells like a public pool, and Tim Durant says after all this time, they've had enough.
2 years down the track, we've got black tar filters full of manganese. We're really fed up. People's hair colour is changing. Every couple of days, people are complaining on our local Facebook page of water problems, and we've just had enough.
Like many residents, he installed a water filter at vast expense. There's not only the cost of the filter, but also paying a plumber to install it. Typically filters last a year, but in Tim's case, his is getting overloaded every 6 weeks. He says local residents have done a deal with the filter suppliers, but it's still over $200 every time they replace a filter. Bronwyn got so frustrated with the terrible water pressure as a result of her water filter, she disconnected it. Locals have pinned their hopes on the launch of a new bore, which supposedly has lower levels of manganese. It was blessed 2 weeks ago, and although it's supposed to be operating now, they're still waiting. Bronwyn doesn't believe the new bore is responsible for the weekend's dismal water, but she'd like the council to front up and explain what's going to happen and what people should expect.
I'd like for the council to give us a date that the new water supply is turned on. I would like them to say, and for 3 days after that, you may see whatever it might be coming through the system, and then we expect that it will be clear and that there will be no issues.
The council says its new water bore and plant is going through its commissioning phase, including checking the systems that allow its real-time performance to be monitored remotely. It expects to start supplying water from the new source from mid-November, saying the new bore has excellent water quality. But it warns residents can expect some discoloration as the new water mixes with the existing pipe network. Finally, the council urges residents to contact it directly rather than comment on closed social media pages, saying it will respond to all complaints. For Checkpoint, ko Catherine Hutton tēnei.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the Labour newbie who's parachuting straight into Cabinet. A former Blues rugby player lends his support to efforts to stamp out rheumatic fever and stop the presses. Real books are back in fashion. How novel. We would love your feedback. Do get in touch, especially if you're in one of those areas that are getting brown water pumped down your pipes in Hawke's Bay. We'd love to hear from you. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpoint.rnz or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Also want to hear from you. Do you buy real books, actual books, the ones with pages, or are you into the e-books? Let me know about that as well. Time now, though, for the headlines with Susanna.
In a major cabinet shake-up, Jacinda Ardern has appointed a new Deputy Prime Minister and new Ministers for Health and Foreign Affairs. Grant Robertson is Deputy Prime Minister and will keep finance and pick up infrastructure. Nanaia Mahuta will become the first woman in New Zealand to be Minister of Foreign Affairs, while newcomer Aisha Verrill has been elevated straight into Cabinet. Andrew Little becomes Minister of Health, filling the gap left by Chris Hipkins' move to a new role as Minister for COVID-19 response. Along with the promotions, there were several demotions. Jenny Salesa has lost all her ministerial warrants, while Phil Twyford has been dropped from Cabinet. Grant Robertson told Checkpoint he does not believe anyone's been shortchanged by the reshuffle. A survivor of last year's Whakaari White Island eruption has described the desperate and lengthy rescue process as he lay burnt and splashed with salt water in a boat. 4 survivors spoke to Australia's 60 Minutes programme describing being hit by searing hot debris, not being able to see anything and being pushed around by the force of the gas. 2 say they had accepted they would die. A rest home has been found in breach of the Health and Disability Code after an elderly woman's family installed a hidden camera. The Health and Disability Deputy Commissioner Rose Wall says the footage provided showed the woman being treated roughly and was barely spoken to by staff while appearing distressed. Some Russian fishing crew members will be allowed to leave managed isolation in Christchurch from tomorrow. 31 of the 237 mariners are infected with COVID-19. The Ministry of Health says those who meet the low-risk indicators, which includes people who have recovered or tested negative for the entirety of their stay, will be eligible for release. Veteran foreign correspondent Robert Fisk has died of a suspected stroke at the age of 74. The Irish Times reports he was admitted to St Vincent's Hospital in Dublin after falling ill on Friday and died shortly afterwards. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time to get to the business news now with Giles Beckford, who's in our Wellington studio. Hi, Giles. Talk to us about Westpac Bank and its annual profit taking a bit of a beating, but what, they're still feeling, jolly hockey sticks?
Well, let's not go quite so far. There seems to be one template at the moment for the banks that are reporting their full year earnings. Last week it was ANZ. Westpac today will have BNZ in a few days as well. And they all seem to be saying roughly the same thing, which is that our profits took a hammering because of COVID. The interest rate margins were squeezed. We've had to put aside a lot more money for bad and doubtful debts. And these are best guesses, of course, as to what they think the pandemic might cost businesses, households, and ultimately their bottom line. Their overheads are up. So all in all, their bottom lines are down. Now, before you start having some sympathy or crocodile tears for them, it's $550 million for the Westpac in the past year. That's down more than 40% on a year ago. If you use their measure, cash earnings, which leaves aside the one-off issues in their accounts, then it's $649 million, which is about 38% lower. So the banks are doing it hard. But I spoke to the chief executive, David McLean, this afternoon. He's actually thinking that the economy is in better shape than many people had feared. As he put it, we were fearing a V-shaped recovery hit from the economy, from the pandemic, I should say, which is sharply lower and then sharply higher. But in between, quite a bit of pain. He's suggesting that, in fact, the numbers show that it's not been as precipitous a dive as had been feared, and that the recovery is looking in better shape than many might have expected. So he's, should we say, quietly confident that New Zealand's economy may come through this pandemic not as badly scarred as many might have originally thought.
Let's move on to the Financial Markets Authority, which is obviously, picking up the cudgels again on KiwiSaver fees. What are they saying?
Well, they've issued a discussion document saying they want to hear from people and companies who are in the business about KiwiSaver fees. They're looking at revising their guidance to KiwiSaver providers on the fees that they charge. Among the issues they want to hear about are whether people feel they're getting value for money, what level of fees are being charged, and what level of service is being given. Interesting to look at the Morningstar survey that came out last week on KiwiSaver funds. And essentially the fees that were being charged for a lot of funds that are passive, in other words, they just track an index, were barely different from the fees that were being charged supposedly for funds that are being actively managed. In other words, the managers there are looking at moves in the market, they're buying and selling to try and maximise their returns or at the very least limit their losses, but very little difference between the fees for either approach. That being the case, you ask, are you getting value for money? Are you being overcharged for the passive management? And that's a very good question. I have to say, this is not the first time that the Financial Markets Authority has brought this issue up. And I have a feeling that there's a hint of the paralysis by analysis in the approach to this, because in the end, 2 years ago, they were beating the drum alongside the Reserve Bank, suggesting that KiwiSaver providers needed to offer better value for money and their fees should come down. But clearly on the basis of this, you might wonder whether in fact any progress has been made at all. If you're so inclined, all the documents on the FMA website, and the deadline is the middle of December.
And quick trot around the markets, Giles, before you head off.
Well, it looked a little bit on the soggy side this morning, down 50, 60 points for the local share market. It's trimmed those losses, just down 14 points. That's about 0.1%. 12,071 is where it's closed. And the New Zealand dollar just biding time, and I don't mean that as a pun for Joe biding time, 66 US cents and 94.1 Australian. We can expect that markets will be a little tentative as they wait the outcome of that US presidential election.
Thanks, Giles. Giles Beckford joining us with business news from our Wellington studio. Natural disaster insurance claimants will no longer have to deal with the Earthquake Commission and instead will only have to claim through their private insurer. Previously, claimants would apply to EQC, who would do an assessment, and if the payout was more than the EQC cap of $150,000, then private insurance would step in. Alicia Foon has more.
For more than a decade, the Earthquake Commission has been a thorn in the side of Canterbury homeowners. But from the middle of next year, anyone with home insurance who's affected by a natural disaster will only need to lodge one claim through their private insurer, bypassing EQC. EQC Chief Executive Sid Miller says the new partnership will see private insurers handle all aspects of claims.
Customers will have a single point of contact for dealing with their claim. So that means they will go and lodge their claim with their insurer, as they do for any other insurance claim, and their claim will be settled by the insurer. So it creates a much more simple process, should be more efficient, should create a better customer experience.
He says the move will transform the way people recover after a life-changing natural disaster, giving the industry the ability to deal with 100,000 claims. Mr Miller says the Kaikoura and Christchurch earthquakes were a catalyst for change.
We've had a lot of learnings, we've had a lot of experience to look at, and had a lot of feedback on the frustrations of people, and we've had the public inquiry as well, which in there. So all of this has come together to go, how do we create something that is going to be far better for New Zealanders?
New Zealand leads the world with this model, where all 8 private insurance companies, AA Insurance, Chubb, FMG, Ando, IAG, MAS, Vero and Tower have joined up with a government entity. The Insurance Council's Chief Executive Tim Grafton says it'll be quicker and less stressful for claimants.
So there's no sort of handover and repeat the process. So it's a quicker process from that perspective. Whereas in Canterbury, there may have been differences of opinion between an insurer and an EQC. Here, all of that is handled behind the scenes, sorted, and the customers looked after all the way through.
Many in Christchurch are relieved they won't have to deal with EQC anymore.
The initial claims through EQC were really confusing and quite difficult. So as long as they make it easy and they help people through step by step, I think it's a good thing. But I'm really concerned that vulnerable people like the elderly, if they make it too confusing, it's going to be really difficult no matter who does it, private or government.
Yeah, it depends on who they're insured with, I think.
Pretty good news. I suppose so. Better than an EQC, because they haven't done that good for us, have they?
Christchurch woman Lisa, who's been helping her elderly mother whose home was damaged in the red zone, thinks the news comes a decade too late.
Everybody should have been able to turn around and gone to their own insurance company and just been paid what the valuation was, because Mum was in the red zone, so I guess the red zone really hit the hardest for people to this day. I can't believe how long it's taken. I just hope now that everybody is just going to turn around and start paying. I know some places have, but they should never have had to wait.
Mike Freeman's been fighting EQC claims on 2 properties for more than 10 years. He reckons it sounds promising, but he hasn't had a good experience with his personal insurance company.
We were actually let down by our insurance company. As long as the insurance company is a reputable one and you're well insured, then there shouldn't be an issue. Anything that speeds up the process would certainly help. You should not be dealing with insurance companies or whoever EQC 10 years after the event.
The claimants reference group chair, Ali Jones, says unless assessments of damage are thorough, consistent and accurate, partnering with a private insurer is not going to address the significant issues claimants have faced and continue to face many years on.
We were all told just trust us, we're right, but hundreds and hundreds of failed repairs and court cases would suggest that that's not a great position to come from. So a little disappointed that the claimant just hasn't been at the real centre of this, and until the claimant is at the centre of everything that EQC and insurers, then we just wonder whether there will be meaningful change.
For Checkpoint, ko Elisha Foon tēnei.
The owners of an earthquake-prone heritage building in Wellington are warning an excessive strengthening bill could force them into liquidation. The Wellington City Council wants permission to seize and strengthen the Adelaide building in Newtown because it hasn't been done yet. Jonathan Mitchell reports.
The Adelaide building currently sits vacant, ready to be demolished. The deadline to strengthen the Newtown premises was 2013. Its current owners bought the building, warts and all, as described by a lawyer in 2015. Now the council's trying to save the heritage building and in a first have taken the building owner to court to get the power to complete strengthening itself. A hearing in Wellington District Court last month was adjourned to allow submissions to be filed and continued this afternoon. A lawyer for the owners, Kevin Smith, told Judge Chris Tui he must be reasonable in deciding whether or not to give the council the power. Mr Smith said the costs will ultimately fall back on the owners to pay back.
If what the council requires is beyond the financial means of their company, and it continues in an unreasonable fashion, such a circumstance, then at the end of the day, inevitably, Lucky Mar Limited would go into liquidation and the bill would stay with the ratepayer, I suspect.
Kevin Smith has pushed the judge not to make a blanket order. Meanwhile, the City Council's lawyer, Nick Whittington, acknowledged it's a tough case to consider because it's the first of its kind and would set a precedent for many other earthquake-prone buildings that haven't been strengthened.
It's a difficult section. It's similar to, or it's identical in many ways to the sections relating to sanitary buildings and dangerous buildings. There's not much case law on those except for the one that I put before Your Honour called Chater.
Judge Chris Tui has allowed further written submissions to be filed. He has not released a decision today and said he was likely to release just an interim order in writing. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell aho.
It is 12 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A former Dunedin airport security worker is accused of orchestrating a bomb scare that shut down the airport in March last year. Pretam Maid is on trial facing one charge of taking an imitation explosive device into a security enhanced area. Timothy Brown has been in court and filed this report.
On March the 17th last year, New Zealand was in a heightened state of fear and anxiety following the Christchurch terror attack. In that climate, reports emerged a potential bomb had been found at Dunedin Airport, the city in which the gunman had been living. The airport was closed for several hours, international and domestic flights were diverted, and sections of highway were closed. Ultimately, the Defence Force's explosive ordnance team flew into the city to deal with the threat. Crown Prosecutor Robin Bates says it emerged the threat was a hoax.
It was made up of, amongst other things, a soda stream gas bottle, a butane canister, a battery power pack, a silver cell phone and battery. Some of the components were connected by wire, and sellotape had been used in the construction of that bomb.
The bag containing the imitation explosive device was reported by Pritam Maid as the 32-year-old carried out an inspection of the airport's perimeter. The device was accompanied by a handwritten note which said, "Alpha birds crash, Dunedin emergency falls." A police handwriting expert says there are indications Mr Maid may have written the note. The Crown says the device was pieced together using items taken from a room where contraband is stored at the airport. Robin Bates says Mr Maid's movements on March the 17th raised suspicion.
Particular interest was the fact that the defendant's access card records for that day, that is the 17th of March, showed access into areas which were unusual, and in particular access into the corridor adjacent to the secure storage room, and that's the room where I've said some of these components for the hoax bomb came from, twice.
The Crown doesn't need to prove a motive, but the device was found near an area where staff, including Mr Maid, had raised concerns about security.
The defendant expressed a view that the fence was too low, it was near a public road and could be accessed easily. Now this, as I've said, was a view held by certainly many of the EVSEC officers, co-workers, but they all described the defendant's his behaviour as being very vocal and hot-headed.
Mr Bates says in the days following the hoax, Mr Maid contacted the media about his concerns, and later a petition was started under his wife's name. Mr Maid's lawyer, Deborah Henderson, says the defence case is simple.
It is accepted by the defence that an item was found at the localiser hut at the Dunedin airport. But the defence says it was not Mr Maid who put it there, and that Mr Maid did not take an imitation explosive device into a security enhanced area.
The jury heard from the first of 45 witnesses this afternoon. The trial is set down for a fortnight. From the Dunedin District Court, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
The Solicitor General has fronted up to the Abuse in Care inquiry, telling the commissioners she was there to explain the Crown's role but not to necessarily defend it. The Royal Commission is continuing its hearing into the processes around redress for people abused and neglected in state care. Our reporter Andrew McRae has been at the hearing in Auckland.
In the early part of the redress hearing, we heard from a number of survivors outlining their experiences and the battle many faced to get compensation and an apology. For many, it involved lengthy court cases, with some successful and others not. While up against Crown agencies such as the Ministries of Social Development, Justice, Health and Education, the body overseeing the Crown's legal response was the Crown Law Office. Its head is Solicitor General Una Jagos QC. She acknowledged the long fight survivors have had to get their experiences in state care fully examined by an independent body.
I understand that they will have low trust in state agencies and in the courts, and I understand that in that context litigation is extremely difficult and the processes can seem very harsh and cold.
She described the Crown's litigation response as being about ensuring that liability is properly attributed.
And I acknowledge the pain and the frustration that they have suffered in engaging with the Crown and seeking redress for their experiences. And I get it that in the litigation response, that can be seen as the Crown ducking for cover.
Ms Jagos admits the Crown hasn't always been survivor-focused.
And it might be that we are never as survivor-focused as survivors want us to be. But as I will go through, there have been significant shifts taken in the litigation processes. Undoubtedly, the Commission will recommend others, and I am listening. We are listening.
She says the Crown must always be aware of any precedent that may eventuate from a court case. In evidence from survivors, there's often been criticism of the Crown's tactics.
Tactics is a word that perhaps I wouldn't use. I would just say litigation steps. Both the Crown as defendant and the plaintiffs, the survivors as plaintiffs, took steps in response to what the other one does. Litigation kind of works like that you take there's a defence. Have I got an answer to the defence? And the steps follow.
Una Jagos believes the Crown's understanding of an abuse survivor's viewpoint has evolved over time.
And I acknowledge that we have been slow to bring a survivor focus, although as I will go through, we have been doing that over quite some years. But I take the criticism that has been a slow process.
The Solicitor General says there has been shifts over time to try and conduct litigation in a less brutal way than the normal application of rules and processes. But in the end, it's a contest between two parties. For Checkpoint, ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
Former Auckland Blues player Matt Johnson had his career cut drastically short after he nearly died from the complications of rheumatic fever. Now he's fighting to stop others from getting a disease that usually starts in childhood but can lead to heart damage and devastating long-term consequences. He's working with the health charity Cure Kids as it put a big chunk of funding into fighting the disease. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn and videographer Simon Rogers filed this report.
Matt Johnson was just 13 years old when he found out he had rheumatic heart disease. Already a keen sportsman, he went to hospital for a knock to the head and they discovered he had a massively enlarged heart. Next stop, open heart surgery.
They talked about how they open up the chest and how they need to fix or replace the aortic valve, and that was quite daunting as a 13-year-old kid.
Doctors told him he'd never play rugby or league again, but he says he was stubborn and defied the odds. In 2018, he landed his dream job, a gig with the Blues.
I felt like I accomplished what I wanted to, and I was living the dream, my childhood dream. And once I got that phone call from Tana, it was unreal. Talking with the legend, and he was the coach of the Blues, and that's the home region for me. And yeah, I felt like I finally made it.
But he only played for about a year. He had a minor heart attack, then massive surgery, waking up from a 6-day coma to find he'd almost died. That meant the end of rugby for good.
And obviously had to medically retire at the age of 26 because of rheumatic fever. And I just wish I wasn't still around, and I wish there was more awareness and just prevention. Because it's tough, man. It's tough as a young kid going through that open heart surgery, and especially not living, your best life.
Now Matt's turned his impressive determination to stopping other children and adults from going through the same thing. And he's not the only one. Researchers have been showcasing what they'll be doing with the Cure Kids money, and it's fighting the disease every step of the way. Auckland University's Jacelyn Lowe is starting at the start, developing a vaccine that would stop strep A, the common throat infection that can lead to rheumatic fever. Her team are working with others from around the world using some novel components.
For example, components that have originated from shark oil, from marine sponges, and also developing really novel cutting-edge nanoparticles to deliver the vaccine.
And child heart doctor and researcher Nigel Wilson is using a drug that's got a lot of attention because of COVID-19, hydroxychloroquine, to reduce inflammation in the heart.
In some ways it's been helpful, COVID, because they use very big doses and that they had potential side effects. So we're using the slower, long, well-proven anti-inflammatory dose that's been used in other anti-inflammatory conditions.
Another team's working on the better delivery of penicillin, which is used to stop long-term damage. At the moment, it's a painful injection to the buttock or thigh, something patient advisor Shannon Leilua remembers from his childhood.
And all I remember of it was it had a black tip. And that was the thickest needle to me. So, imagine, I feel sorry for what the kids have to go through these days. And if they can make it simpler, easier, less pain-free, then be a lot better for, our tamariki.
The disease has been called a national shame. It's rarely seen in the first world outside of New Zealand and Australia. Maori children are 50 times more likely to get it than Pākehā children, and Pacific children 120 times. Auckland University's Annika Anderson is leading a team that will seek solutions from young people in those communities.
So I think if this was a disease that was affecting Pākehā children, you'd get a lot stronger voice.
from it. You'd see communities that had a lot more privilege and resourcing to advocate for change.
And Matt Johnson says he wants to stop other Maori and Pacific kids going through what he did.
Yeah, I just don't wish it on anyone. Like it's long term and it's annoying and it's just a lot of setbacks.
Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
And some quick feedback before the news at 6 on the new cabinet lineup that the Prime Minister announced today. This listener says, I applaud the decision to have Nanaia Mahuta as Foreign Minister. Seems so appropriate to me to have a Māori woman in that position, a strong, positive image for Māori and Aotearoa. On our interview with Grant Robertson, this person says, call him back. The country needs to know what he's doing as Racing Minister. You're right, he has got the racing portfolio. Bad journalist. It is the Melbourne Cup yesterday. I could have asked him where to put my $5. Missed opportunity.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. Jacinda Ardern has revealed a major shake-up to her ministerial team for her second term in government. She's rolled out a new Deputy Prime Minister, new Health and Foreign Affairs Ministers and established a COVID-19 position. There are 6 first-time ministers with 7 new to Cabinet. Grant Robertson is Deputy Prime Minister while keeping finance and picking up infrastructure. Nanaia Mahuta will become the first woman in New Zealand to be Minister of Foreign Affairs. Phil Twyford has received one of the biggest demotions. He has been removed from the Cabinet but will still hold ministerial portfolios outside of Cabinet. Jenny Salesa has been removed as a minister altogether and will instead be an Assistant Speaker. In a rare move, new MP Aisha Verrill has made it straight to Cabinet as an Associate Minister of Health. Dr Verrill says that she feels humbled.
You would have heard the Prime Minister's comments that the pandemic is a key consideration in the appointments she's made, and I'm eager to bring my expertise in that area to the government's response and sustaining what's been an incredibly successful response. I'm excited to be working with such experienced ministers in the health team.
Aisha Verrill says she will be approaching her new role with the same diligence as her career in medicine. A rest home has been found in breach of the Health and Disability Code after an elderly woman's family installed a hidden camera. The woman, a full-time resident who requires hospital-level care with a complex medical history, including dementia, was bedbound and relied solely on the staff for care, Charlotte Cook reports.
The Health and Disability Deputy Commissioner, Rose Wall, says the woman had a number of falls and her granddaughter installed a hidden camera. She says the footage provided shows the woman being treated roughly and was barely spoken to by staff. In one example, the carer was shown on their phone while the woman was naked from the waist down. Rose Wall says it shows a troubling and disappointing picture of the care provided to the woman that falls well below the expected standard. This is Charlotte Cook.
Some Russian fishing crew members will be allowed to leave managed isolation in Christchurch from tomorrow. 31 of the 237 mariners are infected with COVID-19. The Ministry of Health says those who meet the low-risk indicators criteria, which includes people who have recovered or tested negative for the entirety of their stay, will be eligible for release. There are 4 new imported cases of COVID-19 in managed isolation and quarantine today. The Hastings District Council says a new bore will put an end to the brown and smelly water 2 Hawke's Bay communities are enduring. Te Awanga and Homoana say they have endured brown water flowing from their taps for 2 years. Catherine Hutton reports.
Residents of Te Awanga are used to dirty water, but they say on Saturday it was the worst they've ever seen. One resident likened the dark brown water to running mud. The council says it responded to reports from 5 residents at the weekend and it's investigating what caused the colour change. But it says a new bore, which has excellent water quality, should be up and running by mid-November. It says residents should expect some discoloration initially, but that shouldn't be ongoing. This is Catherine Hutton.
Researchers hope a funding boost to rheumatic fever research will help after years of underfunding they say is strongly linked to racism. The charity Cure Kids is giving $3 million to fund 6 projects to help prevent and treat the disease. It's more common among Pacific and Maori children and in deprived areas. And Auckland University lecturer and researcher Annika Anderson says that means it's not had the attention it should have.
Absolutely. I think if this was a disease that was affecting Pākehā children, you'd get a lot stronger voice. from it, you'd see communities that had a lot more privilege and resourcing to advocate for change.
Annika Anderson is leading one of the projects to work with Maori and Pacific young people to find new solutions. In the US, the FBI is investigating a confrontation allegedly instigated by Donald Trump supporters against Joe Biden supporters aboard a campaign bus to Texas. The incident happened on Saturday when a Biden campaign bus heading to Austin was swarmed by a pickup truck displaying Trump 2020 signage, forcing the bus to slow down. The CNN's Tom Foreman has more.
This is precisely what authorities coast to coast have been worried about, Anderson. Here's what we know. Took off from San Antonio, headed to Austin. There is some indication that this was not a random encounter, but it was sort of coordinated on the internet to say this bus is coming this way. The people on board the bus say the Trump supporters were yelling profanities at them. They believe they were trying to run the bus off the road or bring it to a complete stop. This is, we're not even to the vote yet. And clearly, this is a type of harassment.
CNN's Tom Foreman. President Trump has now tweeted saying, in my opinion, these patriots did nothing wrong. It's 5 minutes past 6. Experienced hooker Crystal Ruta has been named Kiwi Ferns captain for this Saturday's League International against the Whetu Samoa invitational side in Auckland. Ruta has captained Counties Manukau for the past 3 years and led the Stingrays to their 11th straight national title at the weekend. Almost half of the West Indies squad won't be released from isolation until the morning of their first 2020 Cricket International against the Black Caps later this month. A small group of players and management arrived in New Zealand on Friday and went straight into mandatory 14-day quarantine. The rest of the squad won't arrive until after they finish their commitments with their Indian Premier League sides in the United Arab Emirates. West Indies coach Phil Simons says the split build-up is difficult ahead of the 3 T20 internationals.
But the plus about that is that they're coming from playing in a high quality tournament, so they will be sharp. And we, the guys that are with us, we've got to get them up to that sharpness level.
West Indies coach Phil Simmons. And the Wellington Phoenix have re-signed young Australian defender Liam McGing ahead of the new A-League football season. McGing made just 3 appearances for the Phoenix last season, but there's an opening at the heart of the Wellington back four following Stephen Taylor's departure. Coach Ufuk Talay says McGing has a chance to make an impact this season. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Aussie journalist advocate Marcus Strum on the Julian Assange case and what it means for press freedom around the globe. Shannon Byrne talks sport from an Australian point of view. And this week's Best of the West, another highlight of Auckland's Going West Festival, features Selina Tusitala Marsh reading her own poetry following her appointment as Poet Laureate in 2017. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7. On RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Cloudy periods, isolated showers possibly heavy and thundery north of Auckland tonight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloud gradually increasing, isolated showers developing this evening, clearing tomorrow evening. Taranaki to Wellington and Wairarapa, occasional rain easing tomorrow afternoon to fine spells and isolated showers. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, periods of rain possibly heavy tomorrow, rain clearing Marlborough tomorrow afternoon. For Westland, mainly fine with high cloud, rain spreading south tomorrow, possibly heavy about the ranges. Canterbury and North Otago, mostly cloudy, a few showers inland, a period of rain for Canterbury tomorrow morning. For the remainder of Otago, also Southland and Fiordland, isolated showers clearing, then fine with high cloud. Chatham Islands mainly fine, chance of a shower tonight. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Labor freshman Dr Aisha Verrill has been catapulted straight into Cabinet, taking on the role of Minister for Seniors and for Food Safety, as well as Associate Minister of Health and Research, Science and Innovation. The Prime Minister revealed her Cabinet this afternoon. 2 of the losers are Jenny Salesa and Phil Twyford, who've been booted from inside Cabinet. Jenny Salesa has lost all her ministerial warrants. Mr Twyford, who was the Minister responsible for Kiwi Build, now holds the portfolio of disarmament and arms control, as well as being the Minister of State for Trade and Export Growth, and he has associate responsibilities for environment and immigration, but all are outside the inner circle of Cabinet. Andrew Little is Health Minister, while Chris Hipkins takes on the new job of Minister for COVID-19 response. Epidemiologist Dr Verrill is a first-term List MP and the only newbie to be brought inside Cabinet. She told me she found out about her new job at the weekend.
The Prime Minister called me and, it was I have to say I was surprised and we talked through the options and how we would make it work.
So, had you expressed interests in these particular portfolios, or what happened before you were told you were in?
No, actually, I had no discussions, had no expectations, but just tried to be prepared for anything that might happen.
So, in terms of your portfolios, you're Minister for Seniors and Food Safety. What do you think of your new jobs?
Yeah, so they're really important areas. I think as a doctor in a hospital, I've worked with a lot of seniors at times of difficulty and crisis in their lives, and through that work gotten to know a lot about their circumstances and aspirations, and I want to learn a lot more and deepen that knowledge really through engagement with the sector throughout this term and meeting people in the community. I'm really excited to be implementing our plan for an aged care commissioner, which is really important as well.
So why do you think that is important to have a commissioner?
So it's an important watchdog role, and it also has the ability to make sure that standards of care are met in the sector, and that's really important because some of the people there are in a position of vulnerability in the sector, so it's important to have a watchdog there to make sure standards are kept, and they can also raise issues directly with Parliament as well.
And do you think that this is a particular sector of society that is missing out or being taken advantage of to the point that they need a commissioner?
Well, like I said, I've worked with older people in the hospital, and yes, sometimes I have seen instances where standards weren't met and people suffered as a result. So I think it is an important area.
In terms of your role as Associate Health Minister, what do you think that job will entail? What are your expectations?
Yeah, so all the formal delegations are still being sorted out, but I've been asked to work in the public health area, and one of our key public health commitments in the election was to be smoke-free by 2025, and that's a really ambitious goal and will require a lot of focus to make sure we reach it.
Do you actually think it is achievable?
I think it's really important that we work to achieve it because there are 5,000 preventable deaths a year due to tobacco, and we have to focus on preventing those.
But is it a reachable goal at this point?
Yeah, I mean, there are well-established measures for getting us from where we are to there. The challenge will be building the consensus around them, and that's the work ahead.
So given that's going to be an area of your focus, I'm interested, how did you vote when it came to cannabis legalisation?
Yeah, so the issue with, cannabis smoking is harmful, and however, I voted for it because for the referendum because the harms of people who smoke being criminalised were ones I wanted to avoid.
And what about in terms of euthanasia?
I found that a really tough vote, and talked a lot to colleagues in medicine and also to advocates, and decided to vote in favour.
So both, 2 ticks for both of the referendums?
Correct, yeah, that's right.
So I want to ask you about COVID, seeing as you are going to be Associate Health Minister. When it comes to COVID-19, do you think elimination remains the best strategy?
Absolutely.
And why do you say that?
Yeah, because you just need to look around the world to see that you can't just have a little bit of COVID. If you let a few cases in, you end up with an outbreak soon enough. And so always pushing towards elimination is the only way to protect us from these large-scale outbreaks.
If we maintain that strategy, again, in your view, does that mean we need to keep the borders closed until we get a vaccine?
Yeah, so I think we're taking briefings on these issues in the next few days, and while I have expertise in this area, I don't want to preempt what officials are going to describe. So if you don't mind, I'm going to listen to those and make sure that in this new role I'm taking all the advice that I can.
In your personal experience, though, with your expertise in this area, do you think that does mean we need to keep the borders closed until we get a vaccine?
So, no, I'm eager to hear what the progress on discussions of bubbles with other countries are and the specific criteria that will be used to determine if they're safe.
So you think potentially we could have travel without a vaccine?
Yeah, I want to see what the advice is, Lisa. That's all I'm saying.
The new Minister for Health is Andrew Little. So have you had an opportunity to sit down and have a chat, a coffee or anything?
We've had a very quick conversation. I'm really looking forward to working with Minister Little and supporting the work he's doing on the health and disability system review implementation. But really, we do need a longer chat.
Are you feeling any nerves or pressure about this? Because you are the only newly elected person to be inside cabinet. That's a big deal, isn't it?
It is a big deal, and I guess I feel like ever since I was really young, I've taken jobs where there have been big responsibilities. When I was 24, I've been night rostered to work in a hospital with support only on the end of the phone, and so I just need to approach this job with the same diligence and hard work and conscientiousness I have all my others, and I just need to keep my feet firmly planted on the ground and go about it in a conscientious way.
So who are your office buddies? Do you know where you are in terms of who you're going to be sat next to?
Currently my office is my my handbag and my car. So I'm looking forward to sorting that out.
And that was Dr. Aisha Verrill, the newly appointed Minister for Seniors and Associate Minister of Health. Nanaia Mahuta has become the first woman to be made New Zealand's Foreign Affairs Minister. She is one of 5 Maori Labour MPs who have been appointed to Cabinet with strong Maori representation across all the major portfolios. Mediana Johnson reports.
It's a history-making cabinet lineup, and not just because it has one of the largest Māori intakes from a single party ever. Nanaia Mahuta will be the first female Foreign Affairs Minister, a role previously held by the now ousted Winston Peters.
It's a huge privilege, but I hope that when people reflect on a number of firsts of many women in this parliament, it's the legacy that we've inherited. The first country to give women the right to vote. We are progressive on issues relating to women, so I follow in the line of a long legacy of firsts for women.
Fresh in the role, the minister brushed off big questions around the Pacific reset, deportations, and China's increasingly aggressive military involvement in the Pacific.
On many of the substantial issues, I'm still getting my feet under the table. I'm inheriting the portfolio from a predecessor who had views, and I'll form my views once I read the BIM and receive some advice.
While Kelvin Davis ruled himself out as Deputy Prime Minister, he'll have his work cut out for him as the new Minister for Oranga Tamariki. A high-profile uplift of a week-old Māori baby in Hawke's Bay last year was the catalyst for 5 inquiries, making it perhaps the most scrutinised ministry over the last term.
Well, look, I'm open to ideas and proposals from Māoridom. The one thing we know for sure is that if we keep doing the same things, we'll end up getting the same results, and that's unacceptable. So I'm taking nothing off the table.
Kelvin Davis has retained his corrections portfolio. Meanwhile, Kiritapu Allen has been brought into Cabinet and made the Minister for Conservation, a massive leap after serving just 1 term in Parliament.
It's actually felt like an incredible just whirlwind, and I just want to acknowledge my colleagues here and being a part of a team that has really put a spotlight on our regions. We represent pretty much all 4 winds of Aotearoa.
She says she'll bring her legal expertise and advocacy for the environment to the role.
The Conservation Act has some of our strongest treaty provisions entrenched into that legislation. There is a real growing component of hapu whānau iwi entering into relationships with the Crown that are really tied onto those treaty provisions and relationships which do need to be developed and grown.
Meka Whaitere, who was sacked as the Customs Minister in 2018 amid allegations of assault against a staffer, has been brought back into the executive, but will sit outside Cabinet. She has always denied the allegations, but admits she'll need to work hard to regain people's trust.
I'm absolutely, honoured to get a call back and to be part of this amazing team, but I'm under no illusions about the enormous scrutiny, and I'm going to work every day to retain the confidence of the Prime Minister and particularly those voters of Ikaroa Rāwhiti.
Willie Jackson, on the other hand, has been promoted to the top table as the Minister of Maori Development. So too has Peeni Henare, the new Defence Minister.
Look, the Prime Minister in her introductory remarks talked about my whakapapa. My grandfather was the last commander of the Maori Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Sir James Henare. I have family, friends, and a strong association with the Defence Force, and I look forward to continuing in that role.
He says if his grandfather was still alive today, he'd probably have this advice.
Mahi a te mahi. Koe nā pēta nā kōrero kia au nei.
Mahi o te mahi, get the work done. A fitting phrase for the Minister and his Māori colleagues whose work starts now. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Miriana Johnson tēnei.
It's 6:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. England is heading back into a second full national lockdown this week, but ministers are warning it may extend beyond 4 weeks. The BBC's Helen Catt has this report.
They're the headlines the Prime Minister never wanted to see, arriving at his own door this morning. England will go into a second national lockdown from Thursday. It should end on the 2nd of December. One of the government's most senior ministers indicated that was the hope, but not a guarantee.
If we ensure that all the steps that we're taking now are taken appropriately, we'll have an opportunity in advance of December the 2nd to review the progress that we're making, and in advance of December the 2nd, we can then communicate to those areas where some restrictions may be required, what they will be, and also other areas where we've managed to beat back the virus, we can explain where liberties can be restored.
Labour will back the new lockdown in a vote in Parliament this week with a degree of frustration.
If what they announced yesterday had been announced when I said it should have been 2 or 3 weeks ago, we could have had the lockdown and schools shut because of the natural break of half term. And people will be waking up this morning and thinking, how on earth did it get to this?
He warned the government needs to use the time wisely.
The government has to keep its side of the bargain here, because if they don't use this time to fix, test, trace and isolate, then I think the 2nd of December will be a review date, not an end date.
And that was the BBC's Helen Catt with that report. The Poets, the Spies, the Vodka and the Magpies. Newly released files showed the New Zealand SIS spied on one of our literary greats, Dennis Glover. Guyon Espiner reports.
The repeating bird call from Dennis Glover's iconic New Zealand poem, The Magpies, is one of the most famous lines in New Zealand poetry.
When Tom and Elizabeth took the farm, the bracken made their bed, and quaddle-doodle-addle, waddle-doodle, the magpies said.
Glover died in 1980 and was described by his biographer as one of the most spirited, versatile and influential figures in New Zealand literature. He was a war hero too, awarded a Distinguished Service Cross for bravery on D-Day in the Second World War. But despite his success in poetry and the military, he was under surveillance by the SIS in the 1970s. His son, Rupert, now a prominent Christchurch lawyer, says the SIS had no grounds to keep a file on his famous father.
There's no way that my father could have done anything to threaten the security of New Zealand, nor would have.
An SIS file note from 1975 says Glover has been of marginal security interest over a number of years. It notes his opposition to the Vietnam War and that a full page has been devoted to his work in the Soviet News, a publication of the Soviet Embassy. Glover had also been awarded a War Veterans Medal by the Soviets for heroic work on the Arctic convoys in the Second World War. Those so-called suicide missions braved dangerous seas and German U-boats to take vital cargo to Russia, which was an ally of the West before the Cold War started after 1945. The SIS also notes Dennis Glover's drinking habits, saying he's caused embarrassment by making provocative remarks, usually when intoxicated, and that he's possibly an alcoholic.
He was a great fan of vodka, as you know, and they would bring vodka around to him, and he made friends with certain people at the Russian embassy, and then they offered him a trip to Russia, and he was very proud of that, and there are photographs of him on Russian warships. That really, I think, was the limit of his involvement with them. I don't think that he was any kind of a security interest to them. I think it was more a publicity thing myself.
But Wellington writer and historian Redma Yaska thinks the intelligence agency was justified in keeping tabs on the famous poet.
Half a century later, it seems almost absurd, but
When you think of the climate of the times, we were still, even in the 70s, still in that Cold War mindset.
Red Mayaska notes that one of Glover's close friends in his literary set was Ian Milner, a New Zealand academic who the SIS says was actually working for Russian intelligence. Records released to RNZ for the Service podcast include an SIS file note saying that Milner was, quote, the least known of the New Zealanders who were agents for the KGB.
He was really in the spotlight in the 50s for handing over secrets while working for the Aussie Department of External Affairs. And so I think, Glover's links with him were always, made, both of them of interest, really.
Red Mayaska believes Glover could have been caught up in what is now known as the Cultural Cold War, where the East and West tried to co-opt artists and musicians and harness their influence to change public opinion. Poet and short story writer Bill Manhire says Glover was certainly a big enough poet to be influential.
He's often presented as a kind of comic figure, drank too much, complained when he had his trip to Russia that he wasn't getting enough vodka at 11 o'clock in the morning and caused scenes and all that sort of comic stuff. But boy, his poetry is beyond belief good when it's really good.
The Dennis Glover SIS file was discovered after his son, Rupert, asked for it under Freedom of Information laws. Rupert found the SIS had kept a file on him too. He doesn't think his dad was caught in some cultural Cold War spy game, rather that he was enjoying the publicity, the provocation, and of course the vodka.
I think he was always a Labour Party supporter. He certainly wasn't a communist. I've just remembered one of the things he wrote, which went like this: I wish I didn't smoke, I wish I didn't drink, I wish I didn't poke, I wish I didn't think, but then I would not be yours faithfully, DG.
He says Dennis Glover was a faithful New Zealander and should have been beyond the suspicion of the SIS. For Checkpoint, ko Guy and Espina tēnei.
Despite the trend in recent years towards e-books, independent bookshops are popping up all across the country. 4 new shops opened in the past few months and another is due to open in Wellington later this week. Harry Locke's been reading up on why it's such a good time to be in the book biz.
How Wellington's newest bookshop, Good Books, came to be is a story in of itself. It started with a joke on Twitter after the long-running Marsden books in Kaharori went up for sale in July.
Janie just put a joke on Twitter and said, will someone buy it for me? And I suddenly thought, God, I've had all these sort of ideas about promoting New Zealand literature and kind of just, having writers' residences and just supporting the, Wellington particular's literary community. And I thought, well, what better place to do that than a bookshop?
Catherine Robertson is the co-director of Good Books, as well as being a best-selling author. Although she and her business partner, fellow author Jane Arthur, were unsuccessful in their bid for Marsden Books, by that point the idea was already fully formed.
I remembered that this space in Jessie Street was coming free, and I rang immediately and I ran down. I ran from Victoria University down here to pin the potential landlords against the wall and say, will you release this space? And they said, of course.
Good Books is the 3rd bookshop to open in Wellington in the past 2 years, and the 4th to have opened in the last month across the country. Appetite for books seems to be growing.
And if you can't travel, you've got travel books, and if you want to be, having people at home, you've got cookery books and things like that, and you've got escapist books and fantasy and stories, or you've got political books where you can try and understand what on earth is going on in this world.
The start of the pandemic and the looming economic crisis would have triggered some nasty memories for booksellers. The global financial crisis brought on a tough few years, coinciding with the rise of Amazon and the emergence of e-books. But the head of Booksellers NZ, Dan Slevin, says this time around people are rediscovering just what a good bookshop has to offer.
They also discovered that your local bookseller is a central part of your community. They have book clubs, they have book readings, they have author tours and signings and all of those sorts of things. And so people are rediscovering the customer service you get from a local independent bookseller.
While Good Books is the new kid on the block in Wellington, that's not going to last for long. Jackson Newland and Carolyn DiCarlo have spent the past 6 years running Food Court, a poetry reading collective. Now they're turning a new page, hoping to create something a bit different.
The largest publishers that we're doing are like the university presses in New Zealand, but going way down smaller to just people who are hand-making books in their houses and stuff.
They're looking to particularly feature Indigenous voices, queer voices, writers with disabilities, and books in translation. While they're located close to a number of other booksellers, that's not creating any tension.
We all support each other, and I mean, we haven't opened yet, so I don't know, but the vibe seems to be that we're all going to be supporting each other rather than thinking about it as some sort of book competition.
While a pandemic may seem a strange time to begin a new venture, data from Nielsen Bookscan shows booksellers are recovering well out of the lockdown. Since the end of May, book sales are week on week stronger than last year. And while sales for the entire year are still down by 7% on 2019, that's not bad, considering all that's happened this year. And with such a tumultuous opening to the tale that has been 2020, booksellers will be hoping Christmas will bring with it a happy ending. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
If you're listening to that, do check out Harry's story online. Kate says, I read library books, real books, well-loved with tea stains, and I love it. Sometimes previous readers make corrections or write little notes in the margins about split infinitives. And this one on Grant Robertson being the Minister for Racing. I would have thought after speaking to Grant, the Melbourne Cup tip was obvious. The chosen one. Smart man, John. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Chris Hipkins' short stint as Health Minister is coming to an end. Now he's been appointed to the new role of Minister for COVID-19 response. Ngai Tahu are taking legal action against the Crown to assert their rights over fresh water in the South Island. A rest home has been found in breach of the Health and Disability Code after a hidden camera installed by an elderly woman's family exposed rough treatment. The Wellington City Council has gone to court seeking permission to strengthen an earthquake-prone building, arguing that the owners refused to. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Kia orana, talofa bula. Find out what's going on in the Pacific region every Monday to Friday with RNZ Pacific's current affairs program, Dateline Pacific, focusing on the major news stories of the day, from politics to environmental, health, social concerns and the arts. Make a date for Dateline Pacific.